Hi, what's up? I'm Channel Pup, the mascot for the level-headed fanboy. Welcome to an extraordinary chapter of the Spider-Man TV show Retrospective, as we wade through the fascinating world of the 1978 Japanese Toei Spider-Man Tokusatsu series.
Wayne is boss, Zuki Zuki Zuki. Fuzikazi mala no funky action in a ping pong.
Today, we swing back in time to 1978 to explore the unique fusion of Marvel's iconic hero with the mesmerizing charm of the tokusatsu. But I know what you normies are thinking. What's a tokusatsu? Well, I can give you that answer, for I have all the facts. I totally didn't have to look it up. Derived from the Japanese term special filming, tokusatsu is a genre of live-action entertainment that blends practical effects, pyrotechnics, and crazy visuals to create the over-the-top spectacle that you'd expect from projects like Super Sentai. Whether it's rubber-suited monsters, space battles, or risky stunts, tokusatsu is basically Japanese filmmaking that goes relentlessly hard on ridiculous spectacle. For Toei's Spider-Man, the tokusatsu genre broke new ground as it took on the challenge of adapting a beloved Marvel character. The fusion of Marvel's iconic superhero with the over-the-top creativity of tokusatsu brought an incredibly out-there take on Spider-Man, who would go on to achieve cult classic status, eclipsing his USA live-action counterpart, who would crawl his way onto screens at the same time. Toei is a powerhouse in the Japanese entertainment industry. It's best known for its diverse catalog of film and television productions. The Sonic fans among you may also recognize the name, as it was Toei who would produce the opening and ending animations for Sonic CD. Founded in 1949, Toei forged a legacy in the entertainment industry, producing a vast array of iconic characters and series that have left a lasting impact on pop culture. They're best known for projects like Dragon Ball, Power Rangers, Sailor Moon, and Shin Kamen Rider. And with Marvel venturing into new territory with their licensing, Toei's reputation for larger-than-life stories made them a compelling production company to bring Spider-Man to the Japanese market. And so, the late 1970s brought a 3-year licensing deal between Marvel and Toei, an alliance that would leave a greater impact on the tokusatsu genre than one may initially expect. The deal would allow Marvel and Toei the use of each other's intellectual property, with Marvel using Toei characters in their Shogun Warrior comic series, and Toei producing a Super Sentai-inspired Spider-Man TV series for Japan. Obviously, Marvel licensing out their IPs was nothing new, but this was more than just that. This was an unprecedented cultural exchange between companies. The success of Toei Spider-Man laid the groundwork for future cross-cultural superhero adaptations. This deal set the stage, brokering global expansion of Western superhero media. So, how the heck do you draw inspiration from Super Sentai for a Spider-Man series? Well, that's what makes Toei Spider-Man so fascinating. New York is integral to Spider-Man. He's the all-American hero. His costume is literally red, white, and blue. This is a guy whose first instincts upon gaining superpowers were to become a TV wrestling star. It doesn't get much more American than that. Part of Spider-Man's charm is that he and his world are more grounded than most other superheroes. He's the relatable everyman. So how the hell do you blend that with Super Sentai inspiration? As comic fans, we love a faithful adaptation here, made with as much love for the IP as we fans hold. The Spider-Man Tokusatsu is barely even an adaptation of the source material to begin with. Toei's Spider-Man is a total reimagining of Spider-Man. For starters, in this series, Spider-Man does not face off against any of his iconic enemies. I'm gonna fucking vomit. Okay, admittedly, I didn't expect it from this one, given how outlandish this show is. But so far, across Spidey's TV history, from 1967 to 1978, only Spider-Man 67 seasons 1 and 3 would feature classic Spider-Man villains. Okay, we had Kingpin for one episode in season 2, but to that end, I don't even know if I can consider season 3 as new content given that 99% of the classic villain appearances are just sliced from previous episodes. Between that, the Electric Company, the Amazing Spider-Man CBS series, and now this, there's a clear neglect for Spidey's classic enemies, but we'll talk more about that later, as this show doesn't just omit the classic Spider-Man villains, it omits the entire cast. Even Peter Parker. This is a complete, from the ground up, recreation of Spider-Man made to appeal to Japanese TV audiences, which is especially interesting given that they left Spider-Man's appearance alone. The costume isn't too dissimilar from the one that Nicholas Hammond will have worn on the CBS Spider-Man series. The key difference here being his chunky wrist bracelet and the fact that he no longer has those disc-shaped T-strainer eyes. Instead, he's got these sparkly Ditko-looking eyes, and it has to be said, it looks a lot better. Wearing the red and blue this time is Takuya Yamashiro, our new Toei Spider-Man. The choice to create a new, unique character like Takuya, rather than directly adapting Peter Parker, was actually kinda a great decision by Toei in retrospect. It allowed the writers to get really creative with Spider-Man, meaning that there's no betrayal to that original Peter Parker character with the changes made. Instead, Japan gets his very own Spider-Man, and I think that's just great. The idea of different spider people representing different cultures is one that's only gotten more popular in recent years. We've got our Spider-Man of Queens in Peter Parker, our Spider-Man of Brooklyn with Miles Morales, and in spite of all sharing the same mantle, they are their own characters, their own personalities that would take on the mantle. And recent projects like Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse have only solidified this philosophy further. Try saying that when you're drunk. So in that regard, Takuya Yamashiro is kinda a trailblazer, as other spider people such as Miguel O'Hara wouldn't become established in Marvel Comics until the 1990s, with the exception of Ben Reilly making his first appearance in 1975. But his adventures wouldn't reach the extent that Takuya Yamashiro's would until also the 90s, which seems to be the era when Marvel really found confidence with other spider people. What Toei were doing with Spider-Man was incredibly out there at the time, as the character of Takuya Yamashiro has almost nothing in common with Peter Parker. He's not a wallflower, he's not a genius, or anything along those lines. Instead, our protagonist draws more inspiration from other popular Toei properties such as Kamen Rider, in that Takuya is a motocross rider. Unlike Peter, he's at odds with his scientific parental background. His story begins with his astrophysicist father, Dr. Hiroshi Yamashiro, calling upon the assistance of Takuya, his sister Shinko, and photographer Hitomi Sakuma to investigate the site of a crashed vessel. However, Takuya is otherwise engaged with a big race. Hiroshi is supportive of Takuya's choice, with the proviso that he wins said race. However, Takuya doesn't stay focused on his racing for long, as a voice in his head calls to him, leading him to the crash site, where Shinko tells Takuya that their father has been attacked. Professor Monster viewed Professor Hiroshi as a threat and had him killed. So Takuya rushes to his ailing father's side, and in his dying breath, Hiroshi tells Takuya of unknown forces invading the Earth in secret. A secret invasion, if you will, except I watched it. He makes Takuya swear to continue his work and save the world. Bit much to ask of a guy, but hey-ho, I guess the fate of the world is at stake. So you might as well tell the person nearest to you at the time. It's biker boy or nothing in this case. Mysterious enemies close in on Takuya. Men in grey jumpsuits with chicken beaks who disappear and reappear. They move like ninjas. He goes to fight them and avenge his father, but injured by the attack, he falls into a hidden cave where he meets Garia, an intergalactic ally who's been calling out for help telepathically, with only Takuya, the chosen one, able to pick up his signal. So there's quite a major lore dump here. Garia is an alien explorer from the planet Spider. He returned to his homeworld to find its leaders killed along with his family. Killed by the intergalactic conqueror, Professor Monster. Vowing to avenge his family, Garia tracked Professor Monster down to Earth, where a battle ensued. But Professor Monster prevailed, injuring Garia and trapping him under the ground for 400 Earth years, which is equivalent to 20 years on Planet Spider. So Garia didn't age all that much, all things considered. Maybe he's born with it. Maybe it's Planet Spider. And so it transpires that the ninjas who attacked Takuya were none other than Professor Monster's Iron Cross army. Since then, Garia sent his ship, the Marveler, back out into space, while he called to a brother of Earth telepathically in order to find his successor, to carry on his mission, given that he is too mortally injured to do so. Takuya and Garia share a common goal: to avenge their families and bring down Professor Monster and his Iron Cross army. But Takuya finally succumbs to his injuries and begins fading. In a bid to save him, Garia gives him his Spider-Man bracelet and injects him with his spider extract, imbuing him with the divine power of Spider-Man, and now the responsibility of taking down the Iron Cross army once and for all. Garia would spend his remaining days in his spider form mentoring Takuya before dying as his little spider self. Gotta wonder if Takuya gave him a dignified burial or if he just flushed him down the toilet. From there, Takuya goes on to become the web-swinging the Emissary from Hell. Spider-Man, with his powers of wall crawling, shooting spider strings and spider nets, his spider sense, ability to see into the future, and his innate ability to talk to spiders. But that's not all, as Takuya has inherited a couple of vehicles from his deceased mentor.
Spider Machine GP7!
Which is a flying car that can shoot guns and missiles, and
Marveler!
his spaceship complete with rockets. But Marveler isn't just a spaceship. With a call from Spider-Man, he can transform into a kaiju mech
Leopardon!
with his own set of unique abilities, including
Arm Rocket!
which it does what it says on the tin, pretty self-explanatory that one,
Leopardon Strings!
which are Leopardon's own set of web powers,
Octopus!
where he chucks his little tiara at his enemies, and
Sodobita!
which is effectively an instant kill to all enemies. Truth be told, it's unclear why he bothers with the whole Spider-Man thing when he could just bring Leopardon with him at all times and just sword vigor the shit out of any opposition. One thing Toei Spider-Man did surprisingly well was how it approached the duality between Spider-Man and his alter ego. Amidst all the excitement of battling kaijus and secret invasions, we do spend time with Takuya's family. Takuya's family brought a much-needed dose of humor and heart to the series. His sister Shinko very much being the woman of the house, or I guess I should say, Minister of Finance, and he's got his little brother Takuji who looks up to him. There's some light-hearted bickering between the family, as Takuya is still a young, impulsive, and frankly goofy man after all. But it's kind of nice to see how they will all pull together after the death of Professor Hiroshi. But okay, if you loved Peter and Gwen in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, you're gonna love this. So we've also got Takuya's girlfriend, Hitomi Sakuma, a photographer unwittingly working for Amazonas, Professor Monster's right-hand woman, who is working undercover as a tabloid editor. It's honestly comedic how little chemistry there is between Hitomi and Takuya, as the two constantly bicker. There's very little actual evidence of any kind of affection between the two, with Hitomi often siding with Shinko during disputes. Now, this can be chalked up to it being a kid's show and cultural differences in Japan. At the same time, that doesn't stop the show from being pretty violent at times, with people dying left, right, and center. Heck, this Spider-Man doesn't even have a no-kill policy. He's quite happy to gun down as many Iron Cross members as he can. Now, as mentioned before, we don't get comic book villains, and it does make sense, given that we don't even get comic Spider-Man here, but I think you could also make that work in a similar way to Spider-Man in this show. Sure, Peter Parker isn't here, but he's still wearing the red and blue, he's still shooting webs and climbing walls. So theoretically, it'd be cool to see a Japanese reinterpretation of characters like Green Goblin and Doc Ock, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. We instead have the Iron Cross army, who generally consist of cannon fodder. They like to make their presence known with their disappearing and reappearing tricks, and yes, they are a threat, but they're also comedic foils too, as they're depicted as a bit goofy and cowardly, and they make silly noises. They also have chicken beaks. Then in charge, we have Professor Monster, pulling strings behind the scenes as he creates his machine bems to take over the world. The machine bems consist of various different Monster of the Week characters and are generally people or creatures that Professor Monster has cruelly experimented on. Then there's his second-in-command, Amazones, who operates in a more hands-on fashion as she commands the Iron Cross army and spies on Takuya in a bid to determine Spider-Man's secret identity. Also, she kinda bad though, hear me out. So after the death of Garia, the show becomes super formulaic from episode to episode. Professor Monster hatches up some crackpot plan to lure Spider-Man out and defeat him. Takuya has to drop whatever he's doing and look like an asshole to his family, goes rushing in, does some poses and announces himself as the emissary from hell, or maybe sometimes he'll vary it up a little.
物言わぬ動物の愛に泣く男スパイダーマン
This is truly the most relatable Spider-Man. He's just like me. It turns out it's a trap, so he fights off the Iron Cross army before one of Professor Monster's machine bems rocks up to cause trouble. It grows to kaiju size, so Spider-Man calls upon Leopardon to take down the kaiju. Some blows get traded before he finally uses Sword Vigor, and the machine bem is defeated. And Takuya goes home to brood about how he'll never know peace until his father and Garia are avenged. There, I basically explained every episode of the show. Generally, it's super digestible as well. Episodes run at only 20 minutes, and there's a lot of narration just to re-establish deeper lore for first-time viewers, or sometimes give necessary context to certain character moments because the 20-minute runtime doesn't allow the filmmakers to really show it. One example of this is when Takuya and Junko are commemorating their fallen friend Yasuki at sea, and the narrator chimes in to let us know Yasuki loved nature, so this is appropriate. It's pretty lazy, but it's a means of keeping to the 20-minute time slot, and hey, it makes everything incredibly easy to keep track of. Sure, the pilot dumps a lot of lore on the viewer, but everything is nicely clarified in the second episode, meaning that as long as you've seen those 2 episodes, you're unlikely to ever really feel lost in this story. While there is a continuous narrative of Spider-Man seeking vengeance for his father and Garia, wanting to kill Professor Monster, episodes are pretty self-contained, and you don't really have to watch all of them to get the important story stuff. And heck, you can watch most of this in any order. The only episodes that I would consider essential viewing to get the overall story are the first 2 and then the finale. But why keep to just the essentials? With that being said, I would like to talk about a few of my personal favorite episodes. Episode 3, Phantom Thief 001 vs. Spider-Man. If you enjoy Amazing Spider-Man 13 for its story of an imposter Spider-Man, well, Phantom Thief 001 vs. Spider-Man is basically one of these stories. A robber known as the Phantom Thief is captured by Professor Monster and hypnotized into impersonating Spider-Man, and is then used as a trap to lure in Spider-Man and have him killed by Machine Bem Genyuchu, a creature with the power to blind Spider-Man for short periods of time. Episode 4, yeah, get ready, there's a lot of consecutive episodes I really enjoyed. The Terrifying Half-Merman. Professor Monster's latest machine bem terrorizes Hitomi at the harbor, luring in Spider-Man, but as the emissary from hell tracks the merman, he finds himself trapped in a cage with it, forced to fight. The fight is surprisingly intense. It's worth watching for that alone, but also the first time Spider-Man and Professor Monster meet face to face. The second half gets a little nuts though, with a concept that's incredibly difficult to explain, but basically, Professor Monster has created a computer program to determine Spider-Man's fate and present it to him via nightmares. I think that's how that works. So Spider-Man has a premonition that he'll fall to his death at a waterfall, and yes, he's drawn out to a waterfall by the merman and almost dies, until he calls upon the strength of Garia and is given a vine to help him back to the surface. Episode 5, Crash Machine GP7, brings the first feelsy episode of the bunch. When an orphan child stumbles upon an Iron Cross Army base, Amazonis commands the Iron Cross Army to kill the kid with a truck. Jesus, these guys really ain't kidding. The truck hits the kid and he's in critical condition, so Takuya agrees to a blood transfusion in a bid to save the child. However, with Garia's blood, there are of course risks involved. Fortunately, the kid pulls through and agrees to keep Takuya's secret that he's Spider-Man. The two, now brothers, bonded by blood. The kid agrees to return to the orphanage. Episode 6, Shuddering Laboratory, Devilish Professor Monster. A friend of Takuya, Yasuki, who died in a hiking accident, returns to his girlfriend Junko. It transpires that he was killed by the Iron Cross Army and resurrected by Professor Monster as part of a series of experiments involving killing, reviving, and re-killing. Despite Takuya's efforts to keep them safe, Yasuki and Junko are hunted down by the Iron Cross Army, and the reunion doesn't last, with Yasuki being killed by Amazonas, with Junko having to say goodbye to the love of her life all over again. Another surprisingly emotionally resonant episode, if I do say so myself. Episode 7, Fearful Hit Tune Song Dancing Murder Rock. A local club band make a song in tribute to Spider-Man, but they are kidnapped by Professor Monster to infuse the song with a special frequency unbearable for Spider-Man to lure him out. This one is just funny. It's home to the Spider-Man boogie, and it turns out that Amazonas is a marketing whiz. Who'd have known? Episode 16, Fine Dog, Run to the Under of Father. These titles. This isn't mockery, I understand it's all down to very surface level translation. Spider-Man works alongside a dog to help track down a kid's father and rescue him from the Iron Cross Army. Episode 27, Farewell War Buddy, Beloved German Shepherd. The Iron Cross Army kidnap dogs and train them to kill Spider-Man, including the beloved German Shepherd of a child. The dog uses all of his strength to guide Spider-Man to the Iron Cross Army hideout. Yeah, this one is really damn similar to episode 16, but this one ends with Spider-Man barely able to compose himself as he says goodbye to the dog. And once again, his best introduction. There is also the movie, which takes place between episodes 10 and 11, where Spider-Man is made an honorary member of Interpol, an organization taking on the Iron Cross Army, while said Iron Cross Army used Machine Bem Sea Devil to fire torpedoes at oil tankers. Now, this is a movie, but with a big fat asterisk next to it. It was a theatrical release at Toei's film festivals, but it is the exact duration of an episode of the show, clocking in at just 20 minutes. I guess the production values, though, are a little higher in spots. The overall production looks nicer, with better lighting, some ambitious directorial decisions here and there, and there's more of a sense of scope to the action. The audio is also of a higher quality, but that might just be this recording. It's also shot in anamorphic widescreen as opposed to 4:3, so it's really just an episode but with higher production values. While the movie does take place between episodes 10 and 11, when Marvel released it to its website, it was labeled as episode 0, which is just going to be confusing. I mean, I tell you what, it's self-contained, and it does definitely give you a little taster of the overall tone of the show. I think that's the purpose this movie served. But this is by no means the beginning of Takuya's story. The show's finale, The Hero's Shining Hot Blood, sees Spider-Man discovering the hideouts of the Iron Cross Army, and so Professor Monster decides to move to a new base of operations and H-bomb major cities in his rocket. Amazonas uncovers Spider-Man's true identity using a poison, but due to her failure to stop Spidey, there is no space for her on Professor Monster's rocket as he chooses his other lackeys over her. This leads to Amazonas turning against Professor Monster and piloting the rocket without him. Out of spite, Professor Monster shoots the rocket down, killing her in the process. This leading into a final confrontation between Spider-Man and Professor Monster. Oh boy, here we go! The moment we've been waiting for! Professor Monster scales up to Big Monster, so Spider-Man calls upon the Marveler, transforms into Leopardon, and with a single swipe of Sword Vigor, Professor Monster is defeated. Spider-Man looks over as the sunset glistens on the sea ahead of him, declaring his journey over and Professor Monster dead. And that's the end. Boy, what an anticlimax. Okay, the first 3/4 of the finale episode are really strong, with Spider-Man relentlessly gunning down the Iron Cross Army in Spider-Machine GP7, and Professor Monster and Amazonas turning against each other. Also a good way to close out Amazonas' story with her finally finding out that Takuya is indeed Spider-Man, after episodes of her writing it off because Takuya just seems too goofy. But the final showdown between Spider-Man and Professor Monster was over so quickly. There's a reason for it. It won't bring you peace, but it'll bring you clarity. So midway into production on Toei Spider-Man, somehow, Leopardon was stolen. Now, I'm not sure how you go about stealing something like that, but yeah. The studios were broken into, the Leopardon suit was taken, and there wasn't enough budget to make a new one. So, Leopardon's role was noticeably reduced in the second half of the series, with his scenes either relying much more on TV Spidey's old reliable pal reused footage, or Leopardon would just be absent entirely. Which, to be honest, I don't mind, as it would break up the formula a little. Because of this, though, yeah. Leopardon couldn't film any bespoke action sequences opposite Professor Monster, and so this fight was over with one swipe of the sword vigor. Still, it would have been cool to have had some kind of fight between Spidey and Professor Monster outside of their kaiju forms. I mean, hey, a hurried ending is still a hurried ending, reason or not, sadly. And with the runtime, there was just no time to see what Spider-Man would get up to after the death of Professor Monster. So, is that it? That's the end of Toei Spidey? Are his days as the Iron Cross Killer now over? While there's no kind of epilogue in the show, this wasn't the last we'd see of the Emissary from Hell. Unlike the 1977 Spider-Man TV series from the USA, Toei Spider-Man wouldn't be immediately buried following the end of the show, as he'd go on to feature in various different comics, with the first Spider-Verse event featuring the return of Takuya Yamashiro, brought in by Peter and Otto as an ace in the hole with Leopardon to take down the Inheritors. But just as he's about to sword vigor, he's destroyed by the father of the Inheritors. But Leopardon is repaired by Spider-Man 2099 and Lady Spider, and brought back in for the battle. Then in Spider-Geddon, we actually get a little retroactive context for Leopardon's abilities, as Otto asks Takuya why he doesn't just lead with sword vigor. It turns out there's a recharge time. That kinda explains some of it, I guess. We've also got Vault of Spiders, a Marvel-published manga, which features the disembodied head of Professor Monster going on to become Prime Minister Monster in a final battle with Spider-Man in outer space. He is once again defeated by a swipe of Sword Vigor before Spider-Man and Leopardon make their way to Planet Spider. Then in the 2020 run of Spider-Verse, we briefly revisit Takuya now living on Planet Spider. Wait, did he just leave his family and Hitomi behind? Probably for the best, they were always bickering. You're better off without him. Also a bit of a footnote here, but Leopardon was in Ready Player One. Not in the film, but the novel it's based on. In the film, his role is instead filled by the Iron Giant, possibly due to rights issues with the Toei company. Today, Toei Spider-Man isn't available to stream anywhere officially, which is especially bizarre as it was made available on the official Marvel website in 2009 before being removed in 2015. Once again, the Internet Archive picks up the slack. It's even more confusing considering Marvel haven't gone to the same lengths to bury this one as they have the CBS Spider-Man. You can still buy official merchandise of Toei Spider-Man, including Funko Pops, Nendroids, a Marvel Legends figure, heck, even an SH Figuarts version. So it's especially confusing as to why we can't actually, watch the show. Officially, anyway. Alright, so let's take a moment to just say, I know that this has been a lot for you to process. You're probably wondering, what the hell was all that about? Toei Spider-Man is about as loose of an adaptation as it gets for any superhero. And when all is said and done, you might be wondering, why would you do this? Well, Toei Spider-Man was never originally intended to be viewed by Western territories. The show was made under an agreement with Marvel that it was to be aired exclusively in Japan. And so, with Spider-Man being a lesser-known character in that territory, changes were made to the Spider-Man mythos to better appeal to the Japanese sensibilities in storytelling. It made sense that Toei would look at what made Super Sentai and Kamen Rider successful and take inspiration for Spider-Man. But why the machine bims? Why the robots? Well, these shows were typically made in partnership with toy companies, and Spider-Man was no exception. Due to licensing issues, they couldn't produce toys of Spider-Man or any Spider-Man characters, but they could produce toys of Leopardon. Speaking of Leopardon, Spider-Man was home to some of the earliest instances of giant transforming robots in the tokusatsu genre. He'd paved the way for the Megazords of the Super Sentai series, and even Transformers. Yes, you heard that right. Without Marveler transforming into Leopardon, we might not have Optimus Prime and Bumblebee. Meaning that Japanese Spider-Man has a surprising legacy in the world of boyish entertainment. The reality is, it was a balancing act between bringing a Marvel IP to the Japanese market and ensuring profitability. So it did make sense that they'd take this direction. What we end up with is a fascinating Elseworld story. As crazy as this interpretation of Spider-Man is, in some ways, I feel it captures the spirit of the Spider-Man comics, maybe even more so than the CBS version. Sure, in that show we have Peter Parker, New York and the Daily Bugle, but with Toei Spider-Man, coincidental or not, we still have the death of the father figure, which we don't have in the CBS version, as Uncle Max died off screen when Peter Parker was young. Sure, Takuya isn't a scientist, but he does come from a scientific background, with his father being an astrophysicist. He's not a photographer, but Hitomi is. And I definitely got more of a sense for the burden of responsibility that comes with being Spider-Man. Him being the only one who can take on the Iron Cross army while the rest of the world is defenseless against them. It also has much more of the spectacle that I would expect from Spider-Man, and unlike the CBS show, Stan Lee actually liked this version, despite other Marvel executives not really approving of it. If you're expecting high-quality storytelling, don't. Toei's Spider-Man is about as intellectually stimulating as Power Rangers, and barely makes any sense half of the time. If you're expecting a faithful adaptation of Spider-Man, get out of here with that. Okay, the costume is pretty much a perfect low-budget translation of the Spider-Man costume, but that's really where similarities start and end. It's an Elseworld story at best, a complete bastardization at worst. But if there's one thing this show succeeds at, it's being entertaining. With flying colors, Toei's Spider-Man is pure entertainment, full of campy charm, over-the-top, low-budget action, and it's a show where its heart is absolutely in the right place, making it tremendously endearing. You can tell everyone involved in this was trying to make this the best show they possibly could. Takuya Yamashiro's portrayal by actor Shinji Todo made him an endearing protagonist. He's a total goofball, but he also does a great job showcasing the journey of a man on a revenge quest burdened with destiny. Furthermore, the supporting cast are all solid as well, as far as I can understand anyway. I don't know, maybe someone who speaks Japanese will come to me and tell me the line delivery is bad. I wouldn't know. I just like it when he screams Marveler. Now again, it's hard for me to really criticize any of the dialogue given that there's no officially translated version of Toei Spider-Man, so to speak. So the subtitles aren't reworked or anything, they're just very direct translations, which can lead to some oddly hilarious yet oddly harsh interactions. Hitomi, what the fuck is wrong with you? Of all of the Spider-Man shows so far in this retrospective, so from 1967 to Toei Spider-Man, I think this is my absolute favorite of the bunch, simply because it's the one that I had by far the most fun with. The creativity on display here also just made it an incredibly endearing watch. We live in a day and age where we as an audience can understand the concept of a multiverse. Actually, a little too well, because Hollywood won't bloody shut up about it. There's a fundamental understanding today that multiple depictions of Spider-Man can coexist in other worlds, be it Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, Miguel O'Hara, or in this case, Takuya Yamashiro. So if you want to see another culture's take on Spider-Man, and are willing to put preconceived notions of the character aside, you might just find yourself having a great time with this version of Spider-Man. As for what the future holds for Takuya Yamashiro, well, he was meant to appear in Across the Spider-Verse, with Phil Lord confirming that he was designed for the film. But Across the Spider-Verse is out now, and Takuya Yamashiro failed to materialize. I'm hoping that they're saving him for bigger things in Beyond the Spider-Verse. But there is also every possibility that maybe they just couldn't get the rights from Toei. Time will tell, but I'm really hoping to see him in Beyond the Spider-Verse. I certainly think it's more likely than seeing the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man return, which is also a damn shame because I'd really like to see a return of that version of the character too. Marvel have a weird tendency of burying these versions of Spider-Man, yet for Takuya Yamashiro, it's a weird halfway point in that he gets merchandise, yet the show is just nowhere to legally watch. Heck, in 2020, the first episode of Disney Plus's Marvel 616 series was all about the Japanese Spider-Man. It would have made some great material for me to reference in this video, but annoyingly, Marvel 616 was removed from the streaming service, so I wasn't able to watch it. Because we live in a day and age, folks, where Warner Bros. Discovery normalized the idea of lost media being commonplace among major streaming services, ushering in a new era of hostility toward consumers and creatives from the major studios. Brilliant, what a time to be alive, thank you. I hate you, David Zaslav. I hate you, Bob Iger. Things that are released should stay released. Otherwise, it is robbery. I'm gonna call it robbery. We were robbed. Next time, we're going to be moving into the 1980s with two new shows. A once-thought-lost Spider-Man animated series, and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Good God, what am I doing to myself? A man is not supposed to consume this much Spider-Man media. Not in this short of a space of time. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think of Toei's Spider-Man? What do you guys think of my video? Comment below, discuss. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button. In the description below is a link to my Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits, as well as just really motivating me. A special shout out goes to the patrons in the $10 tier. And listen guys, I would just really love to do this in Japanese, but I can't. I just can't. I can't speak Japanese, and if I were to try, it would probably come off as very culturally insensitive. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna scream at the top of my lungs instead. So we got Glad Goku, Sharif, Dear Denny, Kale Bennett, That Jordo, King K, Legendary Ray Ray, Dr. SP here. It's not the heat, it's the humidity. Be sure to check the heat index before going outside. Sergio, Cyrus the Skeptic, did you know the skin on your elbow is called a weenus? And that concludes the $10 tier ones. Let's move over to the $5 tier. We've got SSSO6, Dazzle Fizzle, and Vera Wild. Thank you, good folks, so much for your generosity, and thank you to you, the viewer at home, for watching. Have a great day.